From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazan. Sitting next to me, riding shotgun, as he customarily does, is Andre Johnson Jr. Whew, we got a big one today, but before we get into it, be sure to like, share, rate, review, subscribe to this channel on YouTube, leave some comments below, and I have a feeling you're going to have a lot to say about today's topic. We joked on Wednesday that things had gotten a little slow at Saints camp. It was inevitably going to pick back up. I'll be honest with you, though, Andre, this was not the way I saw it coming in terms of picking back up, because today was an absolute fiasco of a day in the real world and, of course, the social media world.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we mentioned that things were a bit quiet, and I thought things may be getting louder to be, you know, maybe the Saints, you know, restructure somebody, re-sign somebody, which they kind of did, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about the Saints reportedly planning to release Michael Thomas, their wide receiver that's been around for the last 6 years. And Sean, we talked extensively on this podcast that this is something we saw coming. That domino has finally dropped. MT will soon no longer be a Saint.
Yes, that is correct. And as you might imagine, it set off a firestorm of comments and opinions, and we're going to get into all of it. But the bottom line is this: Mike T's days in New Orleans are numbered. If you've been watching this podcast, or really anyone covering the Saints, you know that this was going to happen. Normally, when we address the big picture, I jump in with my take, but I've got a lot to say.
Okay.
So I'm going to kick it to you first for your take on this Mike Thomas situation. Go ahead.
You know, we can talk about all the Twitter rants. We can talk about all the antics. We can talk about all the frustration because Mike, he didn't like reportedly or seemingly his usage. He didn't like Olave kind of getting those first-team reps. He didn't like, you know, some of the passes he got, some of the looks he was and was not getting from Derek Carr, the schemes, whatever. There were a lot of reasons that Michael Thomas was frustrated in New Orleans, but I'm thinking about Saints fans and their quote-unquote relationship with Michael Thomas. I think it's a shame to see that just the way that this relationship has ended. When you look at Michael Thomas, whether you like him or not, whether he's frustrated you or not, he is one of the three best receivers in Saints history.
Fact.
He's fourth in receiving yards, about 1,100 behind Joe Horn. By the way, when I say top three, I'm thinking Marcus Colston, Joe Horn, and Michael Thomas. He's 1,100 behind Joe Horn, but he played 19 less games than Joe Horn. 76% catch percentage. That's insane. For comparison, Joe Horn, 58%. Colston, 64.7%. Seventh in franchise history in touchdowns, and really he did all of that in about, 5-6 seasons, and a lot of those seasons he was injured during. So really he had 3-4 elite seasons, and that's what he was able to do. And it's just a shame to see how this team and this wide receiver, they've kind of turned on each other to the point where it's irreparable. Michael Thomas is out of New Orleans, and he's made it very clear in his comments on Twitter and such that there's really no love lost between him and the organization. And I think it'll leave a lot of fans with kind of a bitter taste in their mouth for a guy who they loved at one point. You know, can't guard Mike.
No doubt. And look, that he's got his supporters still to this day. He's got some ones that have been saying deuces for a long period of time. It's in the Saints fan base. But the bottom line is, look, we knew this was coming. So at some point they were going to have to say goodbye. But of course, it wouldn't be Mike Thomas and the New Orleans Saints if there wasn't a little bit of drama on the way out the door. And everything you said were facts. Everything you said were facts. I'll go one step further. I think he was on a Hall of Fame trajectory. I think he was on his way to Canton if the rest of his career had kept pace with the first 4 seasons of his career. That's neither here nor there. Now, I'm going to get into some things with that. But as for the latest situation to transpire in front of our very eyes here today, and my goodness, did it send us all kind of into a little bit of a frenzy trying to sort this thing out. This separation has lasted for far too long. The time has finally come for it to officially be a divorce. Michael Thomas and the New Orleans Saints organization. What he did for the Saints, and the Saints benefited from it, and vice versa, that will always be a part of Saints history, but so will the complicated legacy after he got injured in 2020 and was never the same player. As for the quote-unquote controversy today, which sparked a whole new just a chapter of social media reaction and counter reaction and everything else. Look, I was actually a little bit, I don't want to use the word surprised, but Jeff Duncan reported that the Saints were planning to release Michael Thomas. Okay, we all knew that was coming because of the way the contract was set up, but the bizarre set of circumstances that happened today was basically boiled down to a war of semantics, basically boiled down to a war of wording on how Michael Thomas's exit from the organization is actually going to take place. Technically, both sides are right. Technically, both sides are accurate. The Saints technically have to officially release Michael Thomas and make him a post-June 1st designation because when they redid that contract, there's still some left on the books for this year, even though it was understood that coming up to the new league year, Michael Thomas was going to be a free agent in 2024. So technically, the Saints do have to release him.
Right.
But in Michael Thomas's eyes, and look, I spoke to Michael Thomas's agent today. I tweeted out his response to me. You guys saw it on my Twitter page. A lot of you guys did. It got a lot of traction on Twitter today. They altered that contract with the understanding that he would be a free agent in 2024. It really was a social media blow up, but it was all basically their side coming out and saying Michael Thomas is not going to get cut. It's almost like they wanted to set that record straight. No, he's not getting cut. I'm a free agent. You're wrong about saying I was getting cut because I was always going to be a free agent. So you get into this tiff, really, which is much ado about nothing. The bottom line is he's not going to be here. And if you want to go on saying I wasn't cut, I was a free agent, fine. Who cares? All that matters is, frankly, he's gone. And, you know, I respect what you said about the past relationship, but the current relationship, to me, this had to go with their separate ways for both sides' sanity here, because it's always something. And I'm sure there are certain things that Michael has dealt with from the organization that he felt that has hurt him, and maybe it's not maybe it doesn't look good on the surface in terms of what the Saints could have perhaps possibly did to him, and vice versa. But the bottom line is you have stretched this thing out over 8 seasons. The last 4 have been a total. It's been non-existent basically because he just has not been available. What a bizarre way to finish, like I said before, what was once a Hall of Fame career, or what looked like could be a Hall of Fame career. So great to so horrible. First, on the field, or lack of on-the-field availability, and then the bizarre back and forth between a player, his social media account, and an organization. It truly is sad the way that it ended. But I have to ask this question.
Right.
To all the Mike T supporters, I understand why you loved him in the past, but what are you still holding on to? Because, look, I can only judge by what I see and what I go by. And when I tweet something out about Michael Thomas, the reactions that I get, and when I see, criticism or fury aimed at Jeff Duncan, who reported what everyone knew was going to happen anyway. It's just you can make a debate over the actual wording. He still has a ton of supporters, but I have to ask you, like I said, what are you still holding on to? He hasn't been even a good football player in a really, really long time. The last time he was a good football player, he was an outstanding football player. He was the best wide receiver in the NFL back in 2019, but that was way back in 2019. All we ever talk about right now with Michael Thomas since 2020 is either his injury report or his social media.
Yep.
That's all we ever talk about, and that's all we have been talking about with him since 2020. And look, I spoke to a Saint source today who knows Mike and knows the situation. And I brought up the injuries and how it derailed his career, and he said, yep, and how the way he handled some of them. And it goes back to that situation where the timing of the surgery back in 21, where there was a discrepancy on when he's going to get the surgery, and it cost him the season, and he was always coming back, but it never actually materialized. Then I brought up the social media, because injuries weren't the only thing, the social media activity, and that source told me he just can't help himself. Speaking of social media, we can't ignore it today.
Yeah.
We can't ignore it today because this obviously is something that is a part of the story. So I'm going to leave out some of the derogatory terms in this, but
yes,
let's just read them off,
right?
Okay. Jeff Duncan, funny how they planning on releasing me if I was on a 1-year deal. Don't fall for it. He's the same dude that tried to be friends in season after saying I wasn't the same player in training camp. Next topic. Then he called him a derogatory term, trying to stay relevant. Let's speak on it. Saints leak information to him to try to ruin players' value. But see, I'm not broke, so I can speak on it. He's broke, so he needs clicks. Go look at all his articles that end up not being true. Called him a clown. Look at this clown. Y'all think he know ball? Yeah, right. Y'all really clicking links to what he write. Added some other innuendos that weren't
with a nice picture of Jeff Duncan.
Yeah, with a picture of Jeff Duncan.
A nice picture.
That weren't very nice. Then he added a picture of Cat Williams. Then he went on another bizarre rant. Drew played 20-something years, I think, and I'm still the only one to do what we did. Make your excuse for someone else. Until y'all got catch 149 in 16 games, more 15, but I will give you 16. Holla at me. Great is great. Respect comes first. They're going to call you crazy, but it's okay to not take disrespect. Okay. This is what I'm asking the supporters for, because that is not the workings of a normal human being. That is not, when I say this, and I don't say this jokingly, I don't say this to be a troll. I have said this, you've probably heard me say it. He is someone I truly, when football is over for him, I would worry about his when he doesn't have the football to lean on. I would worry about him sort of in regular life. It just feels like to me. Does it sound like he's losing it a little bit? It's so crazy the way this whole thing is kind of unfolded, but it kind of falls in line with the last 4 years of this relationship.
It makes me so curious because like I'm trying to look at it from a Michael Thomas perspective, and I just wonder, he didn't just get like this. There was, I'm sure, a lot of things that the Saints did to him, between him and the Saints, that we probably won't know until Michael Thomas slides on the podcast and unloads that, you know, there's a lot of things that happened to get him to this point. You know, when he's talking about the disrespect, I'm sure he's talking about the disrespect between, you know, him and somebody in that organization. When he talked about somebody in that organization leaking news to the media, there's a lot of distrust there, you know. And when you talk about relationships, if you build the foundation of your relationship, you know, trust and communication, it's going to be at the foundation of any relationship. And the trust and communication in that locker room between the execs or the coaches or the players or whoever and Mike Thomas, it's just not there anymore. And that's why we see the relationship failing in the way that it has.
Football is a brutal business. The NFL is a brutal business. I mean, look, I've covered this league now for so long, 15 years. Saints, 15 years. Know plenty of former players who, you know, weren't necessarily treated fairly on the way out the door. Let's just put it that way.
That's true.
I can honestly say, I'd have to go back and look. I don't think I've ever seen one that handles his business, I guess you could say, through the social media airwaves, not just with this, but with, you know, the stuff with, you know, Derek Carr earlier this year, the situation with his injury history, the back, the forth. It's something that I don't. Not every athlete does this, but I guarantee you, almost every athlete has felt some form of disrespect from the organization they were loyal to or they played for a long period of time, which I'm sure Mike has those types of feelings. But when he kind of goes on these rants like this, at some point, you've been back for 4 years now. At some point, you've had the opportunity to get back on the field. At some point, either you weren't on the field because of injury or whatever the case may be. At some point, it can't all be, well, I had 149 catches in 2019. At some point, it's got to be somewhat in the recent history. And I just think it's time to close this chapter once and for all, and it's going to happen. We can go into, you know, if they want to kind of fixate on the idea that I wasn't cut, I was always going to be a free agent, it's fine. So be it. It just feels like man, it leaves behind what shouldn't be, but is a complicated legacy for Michael Thomas here in New Orleans.
And the worst part about it for Michael Thomas is because I'm looking beyond this. This is not necessarily a great piece on your resume.
That's
he's
the other
not
thing.
retiring. He's going to want to join another team. And there are teams that on paper could benefit from having Michael Thomas
absolutely.
in there. But if you're a team like the Kansas City Chiefs who could use a receiver like him, I'm looking at that like, I don't know if I want, we got a nice thing going here. I don't know if I want to bring that in. If you're, say, somebody with a young quarterback like the Carolina Panthers, the New England Patriots who are believed to want to draft a quarterback, and you want maybe a veteran voice, a guy who's experienced it, you're looking at that and you're like, do I want that around Bryce Young or Drake May, Jaden Daniels if you're New England, whoever you bring in? Do I want that around my young receivers? You know, because whoever you bring in, the young guy, he's going to have some growing pains. And the first time he gives Michael Thomas a bad ball, does he have to go on Twitter and look about it? So that's just, it's not a good look for Michael Thomas when you think about moving forward, because I'm thinking of the teams that would bring him in. I mentioned 3 just now: Carolina, New England, Kansas City. Makes sense on some fronts, but on the other fronts, it's like, with everything that comes with bringing Michael Thomas in, it doesn't make sense. And then the last team I could think of is, I mean, probably the most obvious to anybody who's been watching what's going on, the Denver Broncos.
Yeah.
You know, Sean Payton, he's been grabbing every ex-Saint off the free agency market.
Yeah, and it's a great point. I mean, like, you know, he said something about, you know, they're trying to, you know, ruin players' value, but I don't think this would ruin his value by having the formality of a release. I don't. Now, I think it's very safe to say the organization and Michael Thomas, they're done. They're done. I don't know how that report today tarnishes his value. I think people have already got a pretty good idea of the situation surrounding Michael Thomas, both the side that was his fault and the side that was clearly not his fault. But you're over the age of 30 now. You've got a lot of baggage when it comes to injuries. And if it were just that, you probably, you know, we'll see what his market would be. And I don't think it would be as complex. But now you have the injuries plus someone who's prone to lack of self-control, let's call it that way, when it comes to social media. You know, that could be an issue within the locker room. Look, we're not just talking about Derek Carr. They had the C.J. Gardner-Johnson situation. They had this incident, you know, around his house earlier this year, with whether or not however you want to look at that situation. I think there are both sides there that could, you know, that could have handled that situation differently, but it just feels like it's always something. So if you're Mike Thomas and you want to continue this pro career, I am genuinely curious what his market's going to be, given all that comes with signing a guy like Michael Thomas.
Absolutely. And you mentioned everybody kind of had their mind made up on Michael Thomas. Either you're pro MT or you're not pro MT. I think he could have changed a lot of minds if he came out and said on Twitter, instead of everything you read earlier, if he came out and said, look, the Saints and I have not always seen eye to eye. I'm blessed to have played for this organization. I'm always going to love this city. Who dat? MT out. So maybe something like that. You know, maybe you're looking at it and you're like, you know what? This guy is in a good place. He gave the city everything he had. He's on his way out. They ended amicably. And what I said earlier about KC or Carolina, New England, thinking maybe we don't want to bring that guy in the locker room, that would be a more mature way to exit the situation. And I think maybe that would have looked a little better to somebody looking from the outside.
You know, it's never too late. Mike T, if you're watching, or if anyone that knows Mike T is watching, listen to what Andre just said. I would strongly consider taking that approach once the dust settles and it's going to happen, and it obviously is going to happen, and it's officially done, to acknowledge it in that way, do the classy thing, and then, you know, see what the future holds. But it's got to the point of silliness and just bad blood, and it's getting more and more bizarre by the day when it comes to this relationship that probably should have ended 2 years ago. It really, I feel like every offseason we said this is probably it for Mike T. Somehow he manages to come back. I said the same thing last offseason. Somehow he manages to come back. It's time, and it's a shame it's got to be this kind of way when he's walking out the door, instead of the celebration of what he's done for this organization. But I guess that's just the way it is.
Right. Well, you know, one guy on his way out, but another guy confirmed to be here in black and gold a little bit longer. Tyron Matthew. I think he extended his contract, kind of added a year to the end of it. So Honey Badger will be around in New Orleans for a while. He just actually held a press conference on Zoom about 15 minutes before we walked into the studio. In that press conference, he admitted that the season was a bit underwhelming from a personal standpoint of his production and the team's production as a whole. He mentioned that he does still feel like the pieces to win with this team in this city are in place. He likes the coaching staff. He loves his teammates. He talked about a young safety on the team, Jordan Howden, for a while. So, it kind of got a little overshadowed by everything going on with MT. But what was your take on them kind of extending time?
This was actually more in line with what I thought we would be talking about by this point this week, was just sort of them getting closer and closer to cap compliance. This is a different approach. This is not a restructure. This is an extension where he took a little bit less money in exchange for an extra year. I think it's a total value of $13 million, according to reports. So good for him. I think he's a guy that's very appreciative of being here. I think he's a guy that holds the franchise in high regard, both as a football player and as a child of this city. New Orleans obviously raised him as well. So, and I think the overall lack of team success in his 2 seasons, the kind of mediocrity, has probably overshadowed. He's done some good things since he's been here, really since about the halfway point of his first year here in 2022. From there on, he's been a really, really, really effective football player. He's played in all 17 games, both seasons, 7 interceptions, and this will get the Saints back down to cap. Well, not back down, but this will now knock off, I think, was it maybe $6.5 or $7 million in cap space, according to one report that I read. So that would put him at about $10 million over. So now you just got to restructure 1 or 2 more guys. It's probably Alvin Kamara, and it's probably Ryan Ramczyk at this point, if they truly believe Ryan Ramczyk still has a future. And you're good,
right,
if you're the Saints. So it's a little bit of give and take. Again, he took a little bit less money, but he got the extra year security. Saints gave him that extra year. I guess technically they didn't have to do, but they also didn't have to get into that convoluted mess of adding more voidable years or whatever they have to do. Maybe they still have him on the back end, but nonetheless, this felt like it wasn't the exact same approach, but he was one of the names I had circled that could be in line for some sort of adjustment, and it turns out it came in the form of an extension. And look, I want guys like Tyron on my team. I want guys like Tyron Matthew on my team, that great teammate, great leader, been through a lot, learned, came out on the other side, seems to be, I love the way he's always owned his past. It's never been, someone else's fault. It's always been, he's always owned his past, and he's grown, he's matured from it. I just hope he can help bring the level of success to the Saints in 2024, because obviously that's what everybody wants.
Yes, and you heard Dennis Allen say it a few weeks ago. He talked about his older players and said that he still feels like they can play at a winnable level.
I think he's one of them. I
think Tyron Matthew is definitely one of them. We saw him make some plays. The interception against Atlanta, he had a tipped interception that he returned for a touchdown in New England, taking on the Patriots. I believe that was a 34-0 win. So Tyron can still make plays, and it's undervalued at times in professional sports, especially in basketball, but in football as well, the importance of having good vets. And I know the Saints are one of the older teams in the league, but when it comes to inside that locker room, a lot of times you're just with your position group. You're not necessarily the whole 53 guys together at once. So when you're talking about the safeties, when you're talking about the DBs, and you've got so many young guys there in Jordan Howard, and you've got Alante Taylor, you've got Paulson Adebo, there's a lot of guys who can benefit from having somebody like Honey Badger around, who's been there, who's done that, who knows this city, who loves this city, who can talk to you about you mentioned it earlier, owning those mistakes, certain mistakes he's made, kind of helping you avoid some of the pitfalls that maybe he would have fallen into when he was closer to their age. So just having him around for an extra year as a mentor, as a veteran, I think it'll really be a big help inside the locker room. And we've seen that obviously he's not going to be the guy to get you 16 picks in the season, but he can still play football at a winnable level.
I'll take 7 over 2. I'll take 7 picks over 2 seasons. I'll take it. He's still a natural ball hawk, and I'm gonna knock right here. Knock on wood. He's been healthy the 2 years he's been in New Orleans. So Tyron Matthew sticks around. Michael Thomas is on his way out. It is what it is. Neither one surprising, and yet it's still quite newsworthy when both players make their respective moves with the organization. Andre, we've had a day. We have had us a day. I expect more stuff to happen probably Friday into Saturday. They've got to get cap compliant by Wednesday, but then Monday, the frenzy starts with the legal tampering period. Legal tampering, that phrase always makes me laugh. But nonetheless, it's been a fun day. It's been a busy day. Anything else for us today?
You know, I'm sure you guys have a lot of thoughts about Michael Thomas, Tyron Matthew, anything else that we may talk about. Feel free. Go to your phone, download the Final Play app, go to the Final Word feature. You can submit questions and comments to us. We see them. We read them. We see the emails. And when we get those, it may wind up on this show. We can talk about it, give you a little shout out in the process. It might wind up on one of our shows on TV. You never know. So feel free to do that. Send us some questions. Get talking in the comments if we said something that you agree with, or even if you don't agree with it. Let us know. Let's have some fun.
No doubt about it. And be sure to leave some comments, like, share, rate, review, subscribe to this channel. We're going to keep bringing you that Saints Fire content for Andre Johnson Jr. I'm Sean Fazan. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.